All right, that is my stupid face for the day. For those of you who are watching on Instagram or YouTube, I quite often pull a stupid face at the start of these videos because, especially on Instagram, that's the tile that you'll see in my bio. There'll just be a whole heap of pictures of me pulling a stupid face. But if you're listening to this on the audio version on the podcast, then you have no idea what I'm talking about. And that's probably all right. You don't have to deal with my face, but maybe a little bit of levity to just clear the air before we get into the darkness that is the SitRep. No, obviously, the point of this, as I always say, is not about the doom and gloom. Doom and gloom. It is about looking at stories, keeping our eyes open to what's happening in the world, and so that we can best prepare ourselves, really, as preppers, as people who are preparedness minded. That's a nicer way of saying preppers, at least. It's less tinfoil hat-y. Welcome on the Instagram, welcome on the YouTube, welcome if you are listening to this on the audio version. I really appreciate you all being here. I especially appreciate everyone who's been dropping comments and putting little likes and subscribes and all that sort of good jazz on my accounts. I really appreciate that. YouTube especially, some really good comments that came in there. I particularly would point people to have a look at the last part 3 of the Kiev stories that I was doing. There was a particular follower there who put in quite a nice little story there. It was fascinating, really interesting stuff. Somebody, I think a US person prepping, 76-year-old, telling me about their preps. Love it. Also, some people have been sending me through photos and stuff like that to my email of their preps, and I love it. I just love it. I love looking at other people's preps. I'm a prepping nerd. I'm a survival nerd. I love the stories. I love seeing what people are doing. So I appreciate it very much. Thank you very much for that. Good looking says, love the funny faces. Luru Hu says, haha, just went on to listen to today's news and here we are live. Yeah, I'm doing a late one. It's the afternoon version. I didn't really get around to it this morning, mainly because I was engrossed in watching NFL. I had a shitty night's sleep. I just didn't really feel like looking at news. I just felt like watching some sports. So American gridiron, as they call it, or as we call it, they just call it football. Although the foot very rarely hits the ball in that sport. So I know we call football, we call rugby football sometimes in Australia as well. But anyway, that's beside the point. This is the SitRep, the situation report, where we go through stories. And if you've been listening the last 3 days, I've been following the saga of this dude over in Ukraine. I will continue that because I've got another day or two of his stuff. It is kind of getting a little bit like, okay, yeah, we're repeating, but there's still gold in there because we're starting to see somebody stretched out now in an emergency. And like I said, the fascinating thing is that this person's not a prepper. And so we're watching the stream of consciousness of this person having to go through these decisions, having to learn this stuff on the fly. And I think we can all learn something really valuable from that. But today I'm going to go back to the regular news, or the irregular news that I usually do. Sometimes it's quite alternative. Quite often these are things that you will not get on mainstream media, or you'll get a different version of it on mainstream media. But again, we're looking at these sort of things so we can best prepare ourselves. All right, let's jump into it today. Let's start off in China. China's the big one. I don't know if your feed's anything like mine, but my feed is being blown up by China stories at the moment, China videos. A lot of the alternate news agencies are pumping this quite hard because it is very interesting. There's riots in China, apparently. Always, it's hard to get the accurate information out of China. We always need to take it with a grain of salt and try and figure out what's going on there behind the great firewall of information that the Chinese government put up and restrict the information coming out from their country. But it does look as though there is quite a bit of rioting here. And this was precipitated by a particular event. I mean, a series of events. This is a population crammed into cities that has been locked down habitually, consistently. the merest sniff of COVID, and bam, they are locking their entire population. Like cities of 10 million people are getting locked down at the drop of a hat. I would suggest that people were probably getting pretty sick of it. So they were getting sick of it, and they started saying, no, we're not going to take this anymore, which the response from the government was unsurprisingly authoritarian, where they actually physically, and I watched videos of this, unverified videos, obviously, but I'm watching a video of white-clad security workers weld bars on doors to high-rise apartments so that people physically cannot get out. Like, this is it. I just look at this sort of stuff and I'm just horrified by it, like utterly horrified by it. It's like I'm watching some sort of dystopian sci-fi film, but it's not. It's happening right now. It's in my newsfeed. So one particular event that happened because of these sort of, more increasingly draconian responses to it was that a fire broke out in a high rise, and many people were killed. I've seen a whole bunch of different reports ranging from 10 to 60 people at least killed. One of them said a lot more than that, but it was pretty unverified, that one. People died anyway in this high-rise apartment that got set on fire. People could not escape because they were locked. They were physically locked within here because of the COVID measures. And now it looks like the Chinese people are going, nah, no more. And they are coming out and rioting, smashing through barriers that have been erected. I don't think it's gone like overthrow the government styles yet, but where we're at the moment is people rioting, and the inevitable, and there's been little snippets of it that I've seen, but I think we're going to see a bit more of it coming in the next day or two, the inevitable response of the security forces, the government forces, which is going to be, I predict, extreme, quite extreme. Like, it's not like China doesn't have a history of doing this. Tiananmen Square, like, they are very prepared to harm their own citizens, to kill their own citizens in order to enforce what they think is the correct thing to do. So this is the situation in China right now, allegedly. Peter Rouse just jumped on YouTube and says, I spoke to people there. It's very, very isolated. Camera angles to make things look worse. And I would totally agree with that. What we're getting, a lot of the stuff that we're getting at the moment, that's why I keep saying unverified sources, we're getting it through social media channels, and social media channels, like one person with a camera will be sitting there looking at something, and then, right off to the side of it, there could be a totally different situation going on. But one thing that I will say, kind of on the opposite side of this, yeah, it might be very isolated, but it's isolated and intense if it is, because I'm looking at videos of hundreds, at least hundreds of people. I'm looking at destruction of barriers, of fences, of gates and things like that. So, yep, this quite well could be isolated, and it could be getting trumped up. I don't know if you can use that word anymore. Can I use that word? It's still a legitimate English word, okay? Trumped. It is getting heightened for media purposes to get it out a bit more, I think, but it doesn't deny that it is actually still happening there, and there have been these riots from this high-rise building that got set on fire and people died. And Peter Rouse says nothing compared to Brazil protests, yet you don't see them all over the media. I did see some stories of the Brazil protests, but they are very curtailed for some reason. I wonder why. And protests throughout the world. There are protests literally going on throughout the world right now, but how much do we actually see of that on our media? Even the alternate media is being restricted in putting this sort of stuff out. So it is very interesting, but these China ones are, probably a focal point right now. Okay, so moving on from China now, let's talk about this little story I thought was quite interesting. It's from the US. Rent crisis breaks the 2022 record. They did a little survey of a number of small businesses. Apparently 41% of US-based small business owners report that they could not pay their rent in full or on time in November. So This is really up to the minute kind of survey reporting that we're getting here out of the US. And this is a huge deal. This is a massive, massive deal. Small businesses are being curtailed worldwide, but US in particular, like we're seeing, it's almost like a systemic attack on small businesses following on from COVID. COVID was horrific for small businesses, many small businesses. Some of them thrived during it. There are certain sectors that absolutely went gangbusters, but on the whole, small businesses got punished. Large businesses might have, lost a few of their bottom end, or their sort of like profit margins and things like that, but a lot didn't. A lot made a lot of money during this last couple of years. And at the end of the day, it's the individuals who are going to get hurt during this, and that's what we're seeing. This is all. The only thing I'm really saying by pointing this one out is this is yet another data point. This is another sign that you're looking for. Whenever I'm looking at the economy, I'm looking at several different data points. I'm thinking, how are small businesses doing? How are they getting by? That's one thing I'm always really interested in. And so when anything pops up like this, I'm like, okay, small business, you have my attention. Go on. 41% allegedly couldn't make rent this month. That's a pretty big deal. There is a massive disparity in many different things here. The cost of goods, inflation, how it's working, rental costs, buying costs of property, things like that, and how it actually converts to end users. Well, you can think of it like this, or I often think of it like this. A small business owner is quite often the padding between the larger market forces and the individual humans. And the only thing that stops individual human end users of products, goods, and services from being absolutely punished is a small business. That's my take on it, and you can feel free to argue with me if you want about that. But I have been a small business owner for a number of years, for over a decade now, and so like I understand a little bit about how they work. Not to the level of a lot of other people. I'm kind of like, I don't have a toe in. I'm maybe up to my ankle. Okay, I'm not like fully invested, but there are people who are up to their neck, and they are drowning right now. But that's the way I see it. I'm a big advocate for small businesses. I'm a big advocate for entrepreneurs. I'm a big advocate for people who want to try and make money in whatever way they want. And I think my personal take on it is this is a big sign of how an economy is doing. If 41% of small businesses can't make rent, that is a huge warning sign to me that the US economy is in a much worse shape than their government would have you believe, than their Federal Reserve would have you believe. It's all pretty obvious if you look at all the other signs as well. It is very obvious. Why should we care about that in Australia and New Zealand? Well, we should all care about that. That is still the largest economy in the world, and as it goes, we go too. Peter Rouse says, why I follow the McDonald's model. Own the building, you have your business. Yep. Yeah, if you actually look into McDonald's, they're very interesting in the way they structure their business. In fact, you wouldn't even classify them as a fast food business. All right, here's some more news that I found interesting. Beyond Meat make fake meat, soy-based meat products, I think. I don't know what they make them out of because I don't eat the shit. But it's some sort of faff that's not actual meat that looks and tastes like meat, apparently, allegedly. I tried some of it and I'm like, it doesn't really, but good try. I guess what, I can see what you're getting at. I always find this interesting though. I found it really interesting with fake sugars as well. Why are people so obsessed with like, I need this stuff sweet, but I don't want to eat sugar, so I'm going to go fake sugar. It's all the supplements or the replacement industry, I'll call it. I don't want to eat meat, but I want something that tastes exactly like meat. Just man up and either eat meat or don't eat meat. Become a vegetarian, all right? It's pretty simple. If you're ethically not inclined to eat meat, if that whole idea of killing an animal and eating its flesh is abhorrent to you, don't do it. Just don't do it at all. Don't fake it. Don't make fake meat. Just don't do it. Anyway, this is a rant, and this is beside what this news is all about. A whistleblower has come out from Beyond Meat's plant, what do you call it, their factory, I guess. And it's got all these photos of their really bad conditions. A lot of mold, a lot of black mold growing, a lot of the food just stored really improperly. Really, really bad sort of hygiene stuff. This is interesting to me for a number of reasons. One, because it's this fake meat sort of shit that I hate, and so I'm always going to try and pick on it. But the other part of it is that I have mentioned this before, but at one stage in my life, I did have a food business where I made protein bars. And as part of that, I went and did the course to be a food safety supervisor. So I kind of know what the standards are in Australia and New Zealand, at least, to how you have to prepare food. There is a certain standard that people should believe most businesses are doing, or all businesses are doing. And so this kind of flies in the face of that. This is really like insidious sort of stuff. The other thing is, it's like there's an agenda going on here where they don't want us to eat natural food. They want us to eat food that they've manufactured. And they're saying, look, and it's cheaper as well. Well, when you cut costs, you cut them from somewhere, and maybe this is where it's actually getting cut from. This is the actual consequence of that. There is no such thing as a free lunch as far as I'm concerned. If you cut costs from somewhere, the bill always comes due. And this is an example of that, I believe, at least. More shitty news about shitty things that shitty humans are doing. Let's talk about zombie viruses. Scientists breathe life into a 48,000-year-old zombie virus found frozen in Siberia. Of course you would. Why wouldn't you? If you came across a virus hidden away from the world for almost 50,000 years, why wouldn't you try and reanimate it? This is literally how pandemic movies start. I'm filing this one under a bit of a, what the is going on? The crazy files. I don't know what to call them. Just stop files. Out of the 13 new viruses that have been identified, the oldest is 48,500-year-old amoeba virus, according to the findings posted by researchers in bioRxiv. Well, 48,500 years is a world record. That's the quote. We do it because we can. All right? That's why we're doing it. I don't know. Good luck to you. Anyway, this is your probably monthly reminder that I put out to have, as part of your prep, something to do with pandemics. We just went through a pandemic last 3 years, as we should all know by now that was it maybe pandemic light. Let's just agree on that. It's pandemic light. It was a good tester version of what a pandemic actually might be like if we had a real pandemic that did some damage. Well, just know that there are human beings out there who are actively trying to create this shit. So maybe have, as part of your preps, something that kind of protects you in that kind of space. It's not something that I would say is a priority. Don't go drop your pay packet on it. But if you've got the spare funds and you can put some money towards it, there are also other purposes for those things, i.e. I have a pack that I use. I have protective equipment, so personal protective equipment that would suffice in a pandemic. It would even suffice probably in a radioactive event. It also suffices if I was doing some heavy sanding and painting using chemicals or something like that. So it's dual use, and that's something I always recommend with preps. Whenever I'm talking about preps, it's like don't really focus on that like really extreme event that may never happen and blow your pay packet on that. That's not a wise thing in my mind. But dual purpose stuff, that is a wise thing. Something that could protect you in that emergency, but is also going to improve your life in the here and now. That's what I would recommend. I'm going to skip over that because it just angers me too much. The mask is off. WEF's Klaus Schwab declares China a role model. Quote, we should be very careful in imposing systems, but the Chinese model is certainly a very attractive model for quite a number of countries. I'm sure it is, just none that you happen to be living in, Klaus. That would be, I mean, just link this to where I started today. Is China attractive to you at all in any way, shape, or form? It should not be. Peter Rouse says, I have 3M gear for paint, etc., so I don't waste the cartridges. For those who don't know, 3M is a pretty big company, and I've got some 3M gear. I've got a couple other brands as well. But this is what I focus on, is that personal protective equipment that tradies might use, or people who are working on sort of contaminants or stuff like that, that you got to use for OH&S, that kind of stuff. So Peter Rouse here says 3M gear, and I've used that in the past. I've got some here. I do recommend that as well. There's a number of other brands you can use as well, but definitely. I'm going to jump over to Kurdistan now. For those of you who've never heard me talk about Kurdistan before, that's an area of the world which isn't officially its own country, but the Kurdish people live in kind of maybe northern Syria, northern Iraq, a little bit southern Turkey, maybe Iran, up against that kind of area of the world. Much maligned by those countries that I just mentioned, these people. And as I've been talking about, Turkey has been actively attacking them recently in retaliation to a terrorist attack carried out allegedly by the Kurdish people, or a certain faction of them. And I said this. I said, well, this is interesting because US is kind of in northern Syria, and US is kind of aligned with the Kurdish people there, and Turkey's attacking the Kurds there. So at what point does the US get involved here? Well, apparently pretty soon. US-backed Kurds say White House has a quote-unquote moral duty to shut down Erdogan offensive, Erdogan being the leader of Turkey, who is very active in saying that they need to push in militarily into northern Syria right now, or against the Kurds. So now what we're seeing is the Kurds put a little bit of pressure on the US and say, hey, you need to come help us here. You need to sort this out, and you need to really shut down Erdogan. I've always found this, I don't know what you call it, the Turkish problem, or the way I look at it from the outside, at least, is a Turkish problem within the NATO structure. Turkey is a key part of NATO. And I think a lot of NATO forces know this, that it holds this particular geographical space that is key, that is very much key. They cannot afford for Turkey to disappear and go its own way. Turkey knows this. Turkey is playing both sides very openly right now, and is basically like garnering gifts off everyone and kind of getting away, and using their leverage against NATO, against US, against Russia, and for NATO, for US, for Russia. So this is yet another thing where I'm seeing this Turkey thing is quite an interesting little conundrum. How is it going to go? Is the US going to step in? This is something that I'm going to keep my eye on. What else we got here? This was interesting to me. Idaho in the US of A. I have been through Idaho, spent not a long time, but a little bit of time. I'd have to say, like, this sort of Pacific Northwest area generally, I really like. I mean, I love Colorado, I love Wyoming, I love Idaho. Oregon's cool in parts. Washington's cool in parts. Montana is just freaking amazing. That entire sort of area up there, love it to bits. This was really interesting. I wasn't really tracking this, and I'd sort of heard rumblings, but sort of thought it was more of just blah 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 leftist kind of propaganda or something. Greater Idaho, the idea of Greater Idaho. Greater Idaho moves closer to a bi-state referendum as 2 more Oregon counties vote to leave. Oregon is an interesting place. Oregon is one of these places that I sort of look at. And if I'm looking at the US from the perspective of, is the separation becoming worse? Which I think it is. The separation may be becoming worse in the US between the two different factions of their ideology. Oregon is a particular example of that, because Oregon has some parts of it that are at the forefront of the leftist sort of thinking. So I'm thinking like Portland in particular and the bigger cities. But my experience of Oregon driving through, because I didn't really stop in Portland, I kind of grabbed a coffee there and continued on. My experience of the rest of Oregon was kind of on the other side. So I've always thought of it as this real kind of battlefront, really. And it's kind of playing out here in this idea of greater Idaho, that some of these Oregon counties are saying, look, we don't want to be part of this anymore. We don't want to be associated with our state. We would rather be associated with the neighboring state, Idaho. This is akin to, I don't know, Brisbane saying, you know what, we don't like Queensland anymore. Like far north Queensland is just filled with a whole heap of Bundy drinking bogans. We want to be part of New South Wales. We're going to have a vote and we're going to become part of New South Wales. Kind of a rough sort of way for any Aussies out there to grab your head around what's going on here. So yeah, really interesting stuff, and interesting for me because it like they're actually saying, hey, this could be a bi-state referendum. We could actually vote on this. So it's getting some wheels on it. This is kind of akin to the idea of Western Australian secession within Australia. If you're not in Australia, you probably have never heard of it. In fact, if you're not in Western Australia, you may have never heard of it either. But I have family in Western Australia, and this was a huge thing. So during COVID, Western Australia shut down like hard to the rest of Australia. Didn't want to know any of us. And they went hard, they went early, and they kept it for longer than almost anyone else. It started to stir up something in the Western Australian mindset that had already been there for a little while. They started talking about secession. They started talking about leaving Australia and becoming their own country. And it actually started to get wheels. Like they were really starting to talk about this. In fact, the rumblings are still there. We've kind of like eased off those restrictions now, and everyone's like, oh yeah, we're back on board now. But Western Australia has a lot of mines and resources. So they garner a lot of money. But Australia, being the low-key socialist country that it is, grabs money from states that are making a lot and evens it out to the other states. Well, that's a pretty good recipe for pissing some states off, i.e. like Western Australia. They're getting pretty jack of having their money taken and not much given, because they're all the way over the other side of the country. No one really gives a shit over the east about them. They're just like, oh yeah, those guys over there, whatever. What is there, like 30 people over there? But Western Australia is they're building resentment. They're building resentment, and now we're starting to see it within the US as well, within individual states. This is just a fascinating situation. I'm always fascinated by this stuff as well, because we kind of grow up in this world looking at lines on maps and thinking this is the way the world is, but it's really not. Just go and look around the Balkans, look around, many different parts of Europe, in fact, and how it has actually changed from 1930 to 1945, 1960, 1970. Look in the Middle East, look in certain areas within South America as well. Look in Africa. Please look in Africa. And you'll understand that these lines on a map are utter fiction, and they can change almost day to day. We just haven't changed them in a while, so we kind of feel like it's solid. That's what is. Peter Rouse says we have the same movement for the South Island of New Zealand. Interesting. Two pretty different places. Like I've been all around the South Island, and I've done a little bit of the North Island, or gone from one side of the North Island to the other. Pretty different places, so I could see that kind of getting up. Spy Scale 27 says WA wanted secession in early 90s too, and it was kind of like went under for a bit, and now it's coming back in a big way. So we've had some stuff coming out in Australia here. It came out a little while ago and kind of just got swept under the rug. That when our former PM, Scotty from marketing, ScoMo, was the PM during the pandemic, during all the lockdown measures and the craziness that was going on here in Australia, he decided to take control of quite a bit more than he should have. I think it was something like 5 cabinets, 5 ministerial positions were actually. It came out after he lost in the last election, but people sort of started coming out and they're going, wait, I thought this person was in charge of this ministerial position. Who was actually in charge? And people were like, oh no, Scotty from marketing was in charge of that. Oh, and that one, and that one. It sort of like leaked out, and then everyone was like, hey, was he in charge of you too? Yeah, he was in charge of us. Oh, hey, you guys as well? And there was 5 of them. That's a pretty big no-no for a prime minister. You shouldn't be pulling together that much power, right? That's kind of like the antithesis of the system that we tried to set up, that not one person has all the power. Anyway, he was doing that. I just, like, it should be illegal, right? This person should be going to court right now, and the people of Australia should be up in arms about this. But apparently, the average sheeple in Australia is just like, oh, okay, well, cool. That sounds, yep. I don't know what to think about that. They're probably waiting for Koshi or some other talking head on some mainstream media to tell them what to think about that. And unsurprisingly, they're probably not going to tell them to think negatively about that. But I'm going to tell you to think negatively about that. No, I'm not going to tell you that. Think however you want to think about that. I personally do not like that, and I think that he should be punished, and that should be shown to all people in Australia, and it should be held up as an example. Hey, when we have a pandemic, that's not an excuse to go grab power. That's not an excuse to take control of 5 different ministerial positions and abuse your position. If you do that, you will be punished. That's what I think should happen. But anyway, I live in a freaking fantasy world called libertarianism. I also think the government should be abolished and we should all just do our own thing. Also not going to happen. What else we got here? This was a little interesting one sent to me from a source here on Instagram. Little sneaky one that happened here. We had the sudden death of the Belarusian foreign minister. Okay. There's been a number of sudden deaths that have happened within Russia, within a lot of high-profile Russians lately. And if you could pick out something consistent with those deaths, it is that they were probably against what the narrative was or wanted to be by the ruling elite. So they spoke out against something, or they fell out a window, or they ended up in hospital and then died later, or they got some horrific case of COVID or something weird happened. So we've had the foreign minister, Vladimir Mackay, suddenly died at the age of 64. Is that any big deal? Who is this person? Well, allegedly, he was seen as a potential successor to Lukashenko, who's the current president in Belarus. Was also seen as a quote-unquote westernizer. So now you see where we're going with this. Pretty suspicious stuff, just on the whole. Okay, first off, we just go, okay, well, they don't want Belarus to start going west, so they, being Russia, are going to try and do everything they can to enforce the Russian worldview within Little Russia there, or I think Belarus actually stands for white Russia, right? White Rus, Bela is white. Please correct me if I'm wrong, and you know better, or can speak any Russian at all, because I can't. Niet, comrade. That's about it. That's all I know. So yeah, that's popped up. But what I particularly found interesting about that story is that where is this going to go? What happens next? Russia doesn't generally play just like, oh, I need to do this, I'll do that. They're not. I don't see Russia as often being reactory. I see them as proactive in what they do. So this is steps to something, or could be steps to something. That's what I'm reading out of this, at least. Peter Rouse says people are drying. I think you meant to say dying suddenly all over the world. Yeah, we're certainly seeing, like, there are some crazy stats coming out about deaths at the moment, which if you don't know about stats, some stats are quite quick in how they come out. Some stats have a lag. So death stats come out, but there's also a lag in death stats, and especially when it comes to statistics around causes of death, there can quite often be a lag in it. But anecdotal evidence and circumstantial evidence about deaths at the moment in the world is super fascinating. And one thing that was actually, this was sent to me by my main source on Instagram, is the effect on funeral services at the moment. And funeral services are starting to kind of be sold out. They're saying, hey, we can't do a funeral within 2 weeks now. In fact, some places of the world are saying we can't really do it within a couple of months. That's how booked out we are right now. Booked out right now for a business that sorts out people who've died. Like, this should be a huge, huge warning sign. Are there less funeral services in the world? No, there isn't. I mean, they have reduced a little bit and consolidated somewhat, but it's not like we had a dramatic drop-off in funeral services. So if they're maintaining or even going a little bit down, but they're heaps busier, what does that tell us? What, using our deductive reasoning there, what might that actually mean? Peter Rouse says, have you seen Died Suddenly? I have not. And I think you're probably second or third person who has asked me if I've seen that. So that might be something that I got to go see. Put my abundant time towards watching that one. If anyone knows where you can see that, please send me a link or tell me if it's on one of those streaming services things. All right, last little thing I'm just going to talk about: the Italian landslide. At least 13 people missing in Italy. Holiday island of Ischia or Ischia. I'm not sure. Thank you, Peter. He'll send me the link on email. Appreciate it. Landslide from the slopes of its highest mountain engulfed everything it encountered, police said. Why am I talking about this? Why do I ever talk about weather events or natural disasters? Because I think that is something that we all need to prepare for. We all will be exposed to weather events at some stage. Maybe they're not horrific ones. Maybe they're not huge ones. In fact, there's in the news at the moment, there's this huge storm cell about to smash into Texas and southern US. So if you are listening to me from that area, then brace for impact. Me myself got caught out I didn't get caught out in it. I had to run out into a hailstorm a couple of days ago in order to secure some things, mainly my car, make sure I put a cover on my car. But these are things that happen. These are things that happen without warning, and these are things that can happen anywhere, anytime. So these are things that I think, as a prepper, as somebody who is preparedness minded, that it really does behoove us to plan for, to have preps for weather events, natural disasters. These are the things that you really want to think about. Yeah, sure, Mad Max could happen. Yeah, sure, the next big pandemic could happen. Authoritarian governments could lock us all down, probably. But weather will happen. Okay, it will happen. I'm not saying it's any sort of like catastrophic algorithm here. I'm just saying weather will happen. Whether you want it or not, weather will happen. So prepare for that. Have a think about that today. Peter Rouse says, remember the solar polar reversal happening also. The solar polar reversal, I assume you're talking about the sun having the poles reverse. So what we think of as north and south moving, there's magnetic fields there, and they shift. And Peter Rouse says, CME, highly likely. That's a coronal mass ejection. That's a extreme amount of energy, plasma, shot off from the Earth, which could collide shot off from the sun, which could collide into the Earth. And a coronal mass ejection will be an EMP event. So it's an electromagnetic pulse event, which, if it is of a big enough magnitude, could potentially destroy all electronics on Earth. Imagine that. Think about how you do without electronics. Think about how old mate in Ukraine is doing without electronics right now. So definitely something to prepare for. All right, that's it for today, gang. Like I said, I'm going to get back to, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. I think it's Timofey or Timofey. I don't know. If there's any Ukrainians or Russian-speaking people, please let me know how you pronounce that name. I just read it as Timothy, which makes me sound like I'm a Collingwood fan in Melbourne. I'm like, oh, Timothy down the street. I just lost three followers. They're obviously Collingwood supporters. I lost 3 Collingwood supporters just now, which means I just lost 6 teeth. Oh, some venom in that. No, I'm just joking. Collingwood supporters, you're all fine. You're good people too. All right, I'm only having a joke. Peter Rouse says, any new gear videos coming? Yes, I'm working on it, but the other part is that I'm coming up to the end of the work year for me, which is kind of coinciding with also having a baby. So in between those 2 periods, I'm hoping to shoot a bunch of videos about a whole heap of new gear that I've got. Some of it I haven't even pulled out of the box yet. So I bought all this gear or not all this gear, but some new gear, and I haven't had a chance to even pull it out and play with it yet. But I am going to try and get some videos up. If there's anything you want me to talk about, any gear stuff that you want me to review, any things you want me to go through, I'll definitely be getting onto that. I've been shooting a couple of videos for ETA bottles, which this is the packet here. I don't have the bottle because I've left it in my car. They sent me a bottle, so I'm going to do some videos on their stuff. Spoiler alert, it's pretty cool. But I'll give you my full rundown of that, and I might even do a comparison video with a couple other brands like Life Straw and Grail and stuff like that. See how they stack up. All right, that's it for today, gang. As always, if you've got any questions, shoot them through to me. If you've got any of your preps, please feel free to send them to me because I'm loving looking at your preps. Anyone who wants to send all your stories about how you're prepping, love to see that. Peter Rouse says, you may need to start a Rumble channel for some gear. I'm flat out figuring out Instagram and YouTube. All right. All right. I'll look into Rumble, or I'll get my my more savvy friends to look into Rumble for me and give me some millennial friends to help me out with it. Yeah, that's it for today. So keep your eyes open as always. Keep prepping. If you get the chance, get out in the garden, get those food preps going. And until next time, thank you very much for joining me, and Semper Paratus.